I have spent easily over 10,000 hours of my life trying all the healing things, the different kinds of meditation and healing modalities and yoga and psychedelics and, getting into personal development and reading this and that and trying to understand. And what has been most transformative out of all of these for me has been getting in touch with and processing all of the repressed anger that I've accumulated throughout my life. I got into this kind of work, this emotional work, through my own struggles with alcoholism. I found myself at the end of my 20s, in a deep pit of alcoholic despair. And I got sober and started doing some of this work. And what really started shifting things for me in terms of relieving addictions, skin issues, and just feeling better, was starting to connect to these deep reservoirs of rage. And as I was doing that, I was so surprised. I was completely blown away by how much rage would come up and how powerful it was and how hidden and disconnected I had been from it. And, for hour after hour, these waves of anger and rage and frustration would come up in sessions that I was doing or the work I was doing with myself. And as I would feel it and let it come through and let it be felt fully, directly meeting it, it felt like these fires were going out of my body. Like, it was getting lighter. Parts of my body that had been tight and heavy suddenly got lighter. It felt like thorns were being removed. And also it was so intense, this anger. It suddenly started making sense why I had struggled so much in my life. With alcoholism as well as other things, like just sitting down as a kid, like teenager, I had been so restless. I was always pacing. In my 20s, I would just leave work or on the weekend, just leave my flat and I would just walk for hours and hours and hours and just drink beer because that's the only thing that relaxed me. Just walking endlessly, really fast and drinking constantly. And then it suddenly made sense. I felt the intensity of this anger that I'd been holding in. It's like, no wonder I wanted to drink. Like that's the only thing that would dampen this fire within that I was totally unaware of. And this is why this topic is so important, is because there's so much rage within all of us that has been so dampened down and no one talks about it. Society doesn't talk about it because none of us are aware because it's all hidden, it's invisible. And this is the dilemma of this repressed anger that we're going to be talking about today. So this is a deeply transformative topic and one that isn't really talked about as much as it needs to be, given how our repressed anger causes all kinds of problems, the disruptions in our relationship, our inability to just sit down and be still, lots of physical health issues. We'll get into all of this at a really high level. Just to summarize, like, what is this all about? We're conditioned to repress our anger because it's too much for us or it's too much for the people around us. So we disconnect ourselves from that part of us, which causes pain in all kinds of ways and disconnects us from this part of ourselves and the capacities that our anger gives us, which is like strength, power, confidence, solidity. And by reconnecting to these parts of ourselves, we can get relief from the suffering and the pain of having to hold it all in and cut ourselves off from it. And we can also access and benefit from the capacities it brings to us. So in this ultimate guide to repressed anger, part 1, we're going to be talking about what anger and repression is and how it works, why it's so important. In a part 2, which will be coming out later, I will talk about the practice of exactly step by step how you go about processing your anger, working with the parts that come in to protect you from it, and the nuances of that work. But this is an important foundation, sort of understanding how it goes. So let's jump in. After I've burped, excuse me. Anger is an emotion, which means it's a physiological energy in your body, and it comes up to protect you from a sense of incapacity, helplessness, powerlessness, this kind of thing. So if you're in some situation, backed into a corner, literally or physically, literally or metaphorically, excuse me, you feel that helplessness, and anger is the energy that comes in to help you take control of that situation again, right? And to get yourself out of, to stand up for yourself, to set boundaries. It kind of delineates the sort of, your sense of self. The problem is that although this is a really healthy and necessary part of your human makeup, the emotion of anger has been conflated with angry behavior, which are two separate things, but they're imagined or talked about to be the same thing. So this is almost like the unhealthy relationship to anger, which is when it's conflated with the behavior. So like yelling at people or lashing out at people, being really critical or judgmental, being really passive aggressive. These are angry behaviors, right? And people think that's what anger is, but it's not. That's when we don't have a healthy relationship to anger, and it comes out sideways in these violent, either physically or emotionally, these sort of violent ways. And when it's not healthily integrated, anger in this sense is destructive because it causes these behaviors. But this isn't inherent to anger itself. With a healthy relationship to anger, which means that we focus more on the emotion itself, not the angry behaviors, that energy, physiological energy within us, that we own and take responsibility for, and we feel it and allow it, then it becomes a very constructive force in our life. Again, once you integrate it and it becomes your life force, that which drives you to engage with the world, to set your boundaries, to be yourself, to say no and yes and all these things, right? So it really is foundational for your strength, your sense of who you are, your authenticity in a very deep level, to healthily integrate your anger. But no one, or very few people, know how to really do this, because anger is sort of demonized as all its most negative expressions. The violence and the lashing out and criticism and conflict and all this stuff, because this is what happens when we don't know how to properly be with it. So anger repression, then, this is not a bad thing. We don't want to I'm not trying to be judgmental here and suggest that what we're doing is bad or wrong in any way. It's a really incredibly intelligent survival adaptation, is anger repression. Essentially, our anger is a very potent emotion, and when we're small and it comes up in us, it can either be too much for us. That intensity of anger is so big that it overwhelms our nervous system. And when you're small, you don't have the capacity to regulate your own nervous system. You need someone else to be with you. And if you don't have that person with you giving you enough support, it's going to be too much for you. And you have to repress it. Another option is that it's too much for the people around you. So when your anger comes out, the others around you don't like it. So your mom or your dad might shut you down or send you to your room. Or at school, you get heavily punished for it. Essentially, you get punished in some way when your anger comes up. And then that's threatening your survival. You need your parents and your teachers on side so you can survive. So you have to shut that down, repress it in yourself, because it causes punishment or a disconnect of your attachment needs. In both cases, it's threatening your physical and psychological survival, so you have to repress it. And how do we do that? We push it back down into the body. That physiological energy comes up, we push it back down. So it's almost like there's an angry part that comes up, and there's another part, a protector part, that comes in and goes, no, this is not going to work. Pushes it back down. Then we end up in this painful state of chronic sort of hyperarousal. There's this anger trying to come up, and there are other parts of us holding it in all the time. And this anger then it disappears, although we don't know it's in our, you are often not aware of that anger that's deep down in your unconscious, but it's there sort of lurking and looping and waiting for an opportunity to come out. That's why occasionally, someone might do something small and suddenly your anger explodes everywhere. It's because all that reservoir of repressed anger from your life has been waiting in the background for some situation which recalls the origin of that anger, which will then come up all at once. And you end up, we'll talk more about this later, that anger becomes like a bit of a filter through which you see the world. So you either get triggered by other people's anger, or you see a lot of anger in the world. And essentially this pattern of the anger coming up and then being pushed down gets repeated until it gets bedded in and just becomes permanent, roughly speaking. And this is a trauma response that then has become a trait, rather than just being a momentary response, because your anger might need to be pushed down at some point, but then it can come up another time. But actually, it just gets permanently, repeatedly pushed down. It becomes a trait, sort of how you are in the world, and then eventually it becomes essentially your personality. You take that to be who you are. It's like, I'm not an angry person, That's just who we take. I never get angry. That's just who I am. But actually, it's just we've just pushed it down so often. We've forgotten that we have access to this emotion, because everybody has anger, right? The fight response is the most like a primordial. It's hundreds of millions of years old. You know, you and your ancestors never would have survived without that energy within you. So it is in there somewhere. The structure of how this happens is that you have that anger, like I said, then you have this protector part. The protector part has a couple of aspects. So there tends to be a physiological holding. So this tends to be like a tension. You can feel your muscles physically tensing in situations where you can feel there's anger under the surface. It can be like a freeze response. You kind of feel yourself freeze, like you kind of go immobile. Like when someone says something to you and you can feel there's anger, but you instantly you stop talking, you stop moving, right? That freeze response instantly comes in to hold the anger in. If you keep on going down that road, you can go into a complete shutdown, where, you know, in situations where you'd want to get angry, you kind of give up. There's a resignation or a collapse that occurs. Where in certain situations where you're feeling helpless, but that anger is, you know, like I said at the beginning, that anger wants to come in to protect from the helplessness. But instead, we just go straight into it, and we just go straight into that resignation. And so, there's no point in getting angry. You know, they're not going to listen, and so on and so forth. And this mechanism, you know, that may have arisen for very good reasons. Maybe we weren't listened to many, many times. And so, but that becomes like a permanent belief embedded in your nervous system. Along with these physiological holdings, and there can be all kinds of, you know, depression, anxiety. These are ways we hold in anger. Sometimes we go a little bit numb. We can start to dissociate, to sort of disconnect from the sensation of the body. We aren't sure what we're feeling. We can go blank. Often people will laugh it off. They'll laugh off their anger. Oh, I'm so annoyed, but it doesn't matter. Or they'll play it down. It's like, oh no, don't worry, it's not a big deal. We can doubt ourselves, kind of gaslight ourselves a bit and go, well, maybe they didn't mean it, you know, and try and give people the benefit of the doubt, really, because we're just very afraid of the anger that feels very unsafe for us. Again, none of this is bad or wrong. These are just ways I've noticed. Often people feel, and I see this in clients, this is where I'm getting my information from, to see it again and again and again. We can feel nauseous or a bit confused. Like, has anyone ever, like, you know, done something that pissed you off and then you just felt really confused? It's like, hey, why did they do that? What's going on? Like, why would they ever do such a thing? That confusion, do you notice that deflects from your anger? You don't care really why they did it. You just want to go, hey, stop it. But instead we go to confusion. The mind will distract you, or we can feel chronic pain. So these are some of the ways that we physiologically hold in the anger and distract ourselves from it, or give ourselves reasons to not go there. There tends to be some beliefs that go along with it. So with that physiological holding, we start believing things about anger and about ourselves. So we believe that anger is a bad thing, that we shouldn't get angry. And our mind takes on projections of what's going to happen if we allow our anger. It's like, if I get angry here, if I get angry at this person, they're going to get even more angry at me and I'm not going to win. Or they're going to reject me. Or they're going to laugh at me. Or I'm going to be alone. Our nervous system starts projecting these outcomes into the future as a way of sort of preempting that anger and be like, no, we're definitely not going to go there. So the physiological holding and these beliefs kind of go hand in hand. It's like the physiological holding is the door and the belief is the lock. And that's kind of the structure of how this works. It's like the anger starts to come up. The mind, unconsciously, this is all going to be invisible, goes, oh no, if we let this up, they're going to get really angry, going to reject me. I'm going to be all alone. Not good. So then you maybe go into a freeze or a shutdown, or into a fawn response. And in this way, you keep it in. So what are the consequences of repressing anger in this way? Most fundamentally, anger repression is cutting yourself off from a part of yourself. Right? There's these angry parts, there's this strength, this life force that you're having to deny. And it creates a real sense of lack and disconnect. You don't feel whole. On some deep level, something doesn't quite feel right. There's essentially a core sense of lack in some way. This is very similar to another consequence, which is inauthenticity. We don't feel like we can really be ourselves because when we don't have access to that anger, sometimes it feels very unsafe to like express our needs, our desires, our opinions, our beliefs, our just be ourselves in our full expression in the world. It feels like that might trigger people, then they'll get angry at us. And because we don't have access to our anger, we don't have anything, we don't have a ground to stand on, in a sense. So it's like, well, I will just skip that whole thing by just not expressing my needs or my desires, or being creative or engaging in the way I want to, or talking to who I want to, dressing how I want to, whatever it might be. Another really important one is that when we repress our anger, we also have to disconnect ourselves from our positive emotions. So we can't just push down one emotion by itself, really. In so doing, we also disconnect from the sense of aliveness and vibrancy in life, our joy, our excitement. Right? These are also cut off, and life can feel quite monochrome and dull, right, when we're numb to this part of ourselves. Another really important one is that we just don't feel good in the body, right? We often have to feel quite numb in the body, or it feels tense. There's like aches and pains. We can feel kind of depressed or anxious. These kinds of things are all really important ways the body keeps that anger at bay. And it simply doesn't feel good. It takes a huge amount of energy to, this anger wants to come up, and it takes a huge amount of energy to hold it in and keep it down. And so we can feel really tired as well. It's just knackering, particularly if we're stressed at work. This anger is wanting to spill out everywhere. We're just having to hold it in the entire time. It's exhausting and feels horrible. So another one is that we also have to come up with coping mechanisms to keep the anger down. We can't risk it getting triggered because it's too unsafe on some level. So we'll avoid conflict by people pleasing, fawning to people, telling them that what they want to hear, or maybe we don't say no when we want to say no, and we don't say yes when we want to say yes. These kinds of things, because to do so might risk a conflict that might have to bring up that sense of setting boundaries and anger and so on. Not getting angry with people actually, but again, that integrated sense of anger where we have a sense of strength and firmness and solidity to our sense of self. That sense of solidity of really being ourselves in the world feels kind of threatening. So we have to avoid any situation where we might have to do that. We also want to avoid risk. So we tend to find ways of kind of just living quite small, dampening ourselves down with depression is one way, or anxiety, or even being like kind of paranoid about things that might go wrong, kind of a bit fearful. These are always, oh no, don't do that. Oop, don't do that. No, better not. Better to stay here. Just kind of, stay small. It's avoiding risk, which is again the same way of it's avoiding having to contact that part of you that you would need to take a few risks and step out into the world. I'm not talking about anything genuinely risky, just like trying new things or meeting new people or starting a business or something like that, We censor ourselves as well. This is tied to the inauthenticity, right? We don't fully allow the expression of who we are in terms of expressing our needs and desires and going after them and saying jokes we want to make and dressing a certain way and whatever it might be. It also comes out sideways. This is one of the consequences. That anger will come out sideways in the form of, maybe passive aggression. Those little snipes at people that you can kind of pass off as a little joke, but actually you kind of mean it. Judgments and harsh criticisms of other people as well tends to be a way. When we're full of anger out here, we tend to project it outwards onto other people. Things like sarcasm, cynicism, no, that's coming later. Being irritable or hatred of other people, groups of people, things, places, hatred of ourselves. That hatred is that anger that has nowhere to go, and then it has to get projected outwards or onto yourself. And these are ways that just that anger, rather than coming up to be felt in a healthy, direct way, comes out indirectly because it needs to go somewhere. So it'll come out in these unpleasant ways that tend to harm you and other people and your relationships. So that's another consequence of, with all these things going on, it actually becomes very hard to live functionally and effectively in the world, or much harder than it otherwise would be, because your relationships are much harder because you're being kind of more defensive and you're being maybe more judgmental and critical of the other person. In your business life or work life, again, you might avoid taking risks. staying more on the safe side, it can feel quite exposing, vulnerable to go out into the world. You need a bit of that strength to go into the world and start a business. But if you don't have access to that, it's going to be very difficult. So all this stuff really does kind of affect your life profoundly, or can do. There's another couple of ones that I've got on the list here. There's perfectionism, sort of the arrogance, aloofness, needing to be right, self-righteousness, moralizing. Stuff in this direction, again, tends to be, that all has a flavor of indignation, which is just another way that anger comes out sideways. And an important one here, finally, is sort of physical disease. So holding all that anger in can cause or contribute to physical maladies. And there's a lot of science on this coming out now. Stuff like, autoimmune disorders, chronic pain is a big one. The work of Dr. John Sarno is great there. Insomnia, gut issues, panic attacks. I had a lot of skin issues. And yeah, it's just the fact that having all this pain that's held in the body can just cause dysfunction. And also the chronic pain arises specifically as a distraction. So it's like if you're worrying about that pain in your lower back, you're not worrying about how pissed off you are at other people and the world. Right? So overall, you just live life and you're not fully engaging with life. This is sort of the core consequence. You're disconnected from yourself, you're disconnected from life, and you don't have access to the strength that you have to go out into the world. Also, if we're carrying that pain, we get very defensive, we get very prickly. Like I said, in relationships, you can be much more defensive and sort of harsh. There's a lack of openness in relationships sometimes, which makes them there's much harder to get the love and the intimacy and the connection that we want. So what are some, quickly, you can think about what I've just said as if you're noticing any of those in your own life, this would be something to look at and explore, this anger repression topic. But overall, you can notice, you're probably repressing anger if you never or very rarely feel angry, but instead you can feel like very anxious or shut down or kind of frozen in some even functional freeze where you feel like you're doing a lot, but it's kind of always a struggle. Anger is a regular part of the human experience. So it's never there. That's a sign that it's being repressed. Another aspect that fits in with this is that even if you never feel it, occasionally it'll come up in a giant burst, a giant volcano. That's a sign, again, that there's this big reservoir of anger that hasn't been felt within you. And just a little prick will burst that bubble and it'll come flying out at once. Because normally light or medium triggers, wouldn't be enough to bring it up because the defenses are so strong. But when you get a big trigger, suddenly everything will just burst through the defenses like a dam bursting. Another sign is, if you avoid conflict, if there's a lot of people pleasing going on, if you find it hard to express yourself clearly and authentically, your needs and wants and sort of moving around in the world more or less as you would like, that's another sign. Difficulties asserting your boundaries with people saying, no, I don't have time then, and yes, I could do then. The yeses and nos. Another one is that you see a lot of anger out there, quote unquote, the anger in other people or out in the world you find sort of especially triggering. No one finds anger, particularly comfortable, but as if it feels very threatening to you internally, that's a sign that, it's simply the same thing. If anger feels unsafe to you, seeing it in someone else will feel just as unsafe. I'm not suggesting that it's totally fine that everyone's getting angry. There are important nuances in how we need to feel anger and allow it. And I'll be talking about those in the second video on the practices of this. Another one is, you notice it coming out sideways. If you're passive aggressive, resentful, kind of psst, psst, those little spines you're just firing at other people, or being very judgmental of other people. And it could even it could be, I know you think in your head that there are some groups of people who deserve to be angry at, but if it's really bogging you down and you're really getting stuck in these loops of anger towards these other groups of people, Again, that's a sign that there's something deeper going on. It's not just that. It's not what appears on the surface. That's a hook that's hooking into something within you that could usefully do with a little exploration if you fancy it. And finally, just the chronic pain and those health issues as well. If there's a lot of chronic pain with no apparent cause, you might want to explore anger. So why would we want to go and dive into this anger? Well, as you start working through the defenses and starting to learn how to bring up, discover, and feel and integrate this anger, again, all in the second video, the most important thing is that you start to reconnect to yourself. You will start to feel more whole because you're welcoming back in these parts of you which you had disowned, right? That slight sense of lack will start to diminish bit by bit the more and more you connect to these layers of anger within you. You'll find it moves you in the direction of authenticity. Now, authenticity takes a lifetime to become yourself, but you can tiptoe your way there very usefully by starting to feel your anger, because that's what gives you the strength to kind of just be yourself, assert yourself, desires, needs, expressions. I've talked about it a lot, so I'll leave it there. You can meet conflict in the world in a healthier way, where you're not terrified of it. You can say, if someone's been working on your house and they've done a crap job, you can say, hey, this isn't great. Can you fix this? If you don't want to do something, you say no. If you do want to do something, you say yes. You can take risks and kind of just step into the world and engage with it more. It's kind of that sense of resilience and boundary and the solidity again that allows you to do that. Another important one is you become more of a sovereign being. A lot of us sort of outsource our sovereignty to the world, to other people, where we're always looking for approval, like how we want to be, how we want to live life. We're looking for approval from other people all the time. Because that feels safe. And the more of that anger you've integrated, the more capacity you have to individuate a little bit out of the sort of the social norms and that safe little bubble you've created, which would otherwise feel very scary or impossible. Well, with that, once you've integrated it, it sort of gives you that fuel to do so. So you're more and more just being in the world on your own terms, without needing that approval. An important one, the body will feel better. That tension, the density, the heaviness, the aches, they start to lighten over time as you work through the layers of anger, because they were only there to hold that anger in the first place. So I've noticed a huge difference in my body. It's so much more relaxed and open and soft. It's frankly incredible. Finally, you trust yourself more. Because you have to doubt yourself when you don't have access to that anger. It's like you always have to doubt yourself to keep that force at bay, right? And so you can start to trust yourself more, particularly as you find your way with it. Because at the beginning, if you've been repressing your anger a lot, it might start coming up a lot, and maybe you start going too far in the other direction, where you start expressing your anger too much. This isn't helpful either. It might be it might be a path you have to go through, a period you have to go through, but you eventually start coming back to a much more balanced, grounded place where you can just trust yourself. You can trust your gut and follow the sense of how you should be, moving through life. Whew. Okay. That'll do for now. This is a very deep topic. I've tried to cover a few aspects here quite quickly. I could talk for days on this one. Hopefully it's given you some just flavor or piqued your interest in this topic a little bit. And if you want to get into the really practical aspects of how we do this, how to get in touch with anger, how to process it, how to integrate it, the traps, the pitfalls, the mistakes, how it changes over time, the different phases of this process, stay tuned for episode number 2. Send me a message with any questions. And as always, I do help people with this. I work one-on-one with them. To help them feel their feelings and get in touch with these aspects of themselves. So just reach out if you want some support.